43 years is a long time to carry a piece of paper. Lorraine Page had been carrying hers since February 14, 1982, the day she was 18 years old, and had signed the documents in a room that smelled like floor cleaner at the Chatham County Department of Family and Children's Services in Savannah, Georgia, and had surrendered her daughter to adoption and had been given, as part of the administrative process, a copy of the original birth certificate. The woman who handed it to her had said, "You may want to keep this." Lorraine had taken it. She had folded it into quarters. She had put it in her coat pocket. She had walked out of the building into the February cold and had stood on the sidewalk for a long time before she could walk to the bus stop. She had kept the birth certificate in every wallet she had owned for 43 years. It had been refolded so many times that the creases had gone white and soft. The ink had faded at the edges. The paper itself had the texture of something that had been handled by a person who needed to handle it. Slightly worn at the corners. Slightly warmer than paper should be. The temperature of something kept close to a body for 4 decades. On the birth certificate, in the space for the child's name, Lorraine had written the only name she had given her daughter before giving her away. Joy. Not the name the adoptive family would give her. Just Joy. Just the word she had for what the child had been. Briefly, before the room with the floor cleaner smell and the documents and the walk to the bus stop in the February cold. 433 miles away in Charleston, South Carolina, Angela Moss had been carrying her own piece of paper since she was 18 years old. It was a copy of her adoption record, given to her by the state of Georgia when she turned 18 and submitted a request under the Adult Adoptee Access Law. The record contained, among other things, a reference number that matched the reference number on the birth certificate in Lorraine Page's wallet. Angela had not known this. The numbers were administrative, not something she was trained to cross-reference. She carried the adoption record because it was the only official document that connected her to the woman she had been trying to find for 25 years. She had found dead ends. She had submitted to NA databases 3 times and received distant cousin matches that led nowhere useful. She had hired a search specialist in 2009 who had spent 6 months and $3,200 of Angela's money before saying, apologetically, that the records were sealed in ways that made further progress unlikely without the birth mother's cooperation. Angela had thanked him and paid the invoice and put the adoption record back in the fireproof box where she kept it, and had told herself she was done looking. She was not done. She had just stopped looking in ways that were likely to succeed. She had applied to Family Feud in September 2025 with her husband Darius, his sister Keena, Keena's husband Will, and their daughter Kessia, who was 11 years old and who had been told they were going to a TV show in Atlanta, and who had said, "What kind of TV show?" Angela had said, "The kind where you answer questions and win money." Kessia had said, "Are we going to win?" Angela had said, "I always think we might." She had not told anyone about the adoption record in the fireproof box. It was not relevant. They were going on a game show. Lorraine Page had applied to Family Feud in August 2025 with her sister Carol, Carol's husband Desmond, Carol's son Jalen, and Carol's daughter-in-law Britta. Carol had applied because Carol had been trying for 11 years to get Lorraine to do something spontaneous and had identified Family Feud as the category of spontaneous that Lorraine might actually consent to. Because Lorraine watched it every night and had opinions about every contestant, and Carol had decided that this was the sign. Lorraine had said yes because she was 61 years old and she was a school librarian who had spent 43 years being careful, and she thought perhaps it was time to go somewhere new on a Tuesday morning and see what happened. She had put the birth certificate in her purse, where it always was. She had no idea what was going to happen. Every February 14th for 43 years, Lorraine Page lit a candle. She did it alone. She did not talk about it. Her sister Carol knew about it in the abstract. Knew that Lorraine had given a baby up for adoption at 18. Knew it was something Lorraine carried. Did not know the specific ritual because Lorraine had not shared the specific ritual, because the specific ritual was not something she had words for that felt adequate. She lit the candle. She sat with it. She thought about Joy, which was what she still called her in her private mind. Not Angela, not whatever name the adoptive family had given her. Just Joy. The name she had written on the birth certificate in the room with the floor cleaner smell. The only gift she had been sure she was giving freely. She sat for an hour. She blew the candle out. She went to bed. She had done this 43 times. On February 14, 2025, 9 months before the Family Feud taping, Angela Moss had lit a candle. She had been doing this since she was 22, the year she had learned through a therapy session that the sadness she felt every year on her birthday was not ordinary birthday sadness, but something more specific. A grief for an origin she could not access. A person she could not find. Her therapist had suggested ritual as a way of honoring the feeling rather than managing it. Angela had gone home and lit a candle and sat with it for an hour and thought about the woman she had never met. The woman who had made the decision that had made Angela's life. The woman who was somewhere in the world on this same day, perhaps also thinking about this same absence. She had done this for 21 years. Neither woman knew the other did it. Kezia had noticed. She was 11, and she noticed things. Her mother alone in the living room on February 14th, the candle. The specific quality of the quiet that was different from other quiet. She had asked once, "Mama, what are you doing?" Angela had said, "Thinking about someone I love who I've never met." Kezia had considered this. She had said, "Is she thinking about you too?" Angela had said, "I think she might be." Kezia had nodded and gone back to her room and had not asked again, because she understood, at 11, that some answers are complete even when they feel incomplete. Steve Harvey walked onto the Family Feud stage on November 18, 2025, and introduced himself to both families. The Page family from Savannah, Lorraine, Carol, Desmond, Jalen, Britta. The Moss family from Charleston, Angela, Darius, Keena, Will, and Kezia in the contestant seats, watching everything with the particular attention she brought to rooms her mother entered. Steve Harvey had noticed both women during introductions, not because of anything unusual, because of the quality each brought to the room separately. A quality that was, he would realize later, the same quality. A kind of watchful stillness. A sense of someone who had been waiting for something for a long time and had learned to wait without performing the waiting. He had set it aside. He had begun the game. The first round was competitive and warm. Both families were good. Carol was fast, Jalen was instinctive, Britta was wrong at high volume and delightfully unapologetic about it. On the other side, Darius was steady. Keena was sharp. Will had a gift for the obvious answer that everyone else was overthinking. Lorraine and Angela both played with the careful precision of people who thought before they spoke, which meant they were sometimes a beat behind the buzzer and sometimes exactly right. Steve Harvey was mid-joke with Jalen when he saw it the first time. Lorraine, standing at the podium, touched her left collarbone. It was a small gesture, the hand coming up to rest briefly at the base of the throat, the fingers settling on the collarbone, the unconscious gesture of a woman managing emotion. The board had just shown an answer she had predicted correctly, and she had made the gesture in the moment of satisfaction. Steve filed it. 4 minutes later, the board showed an answer the Moss family had missed, and Angela touched her left collarbone. The same hand, the same collarbone, the same settling of fingers, the same gesture, Not identical, no two people's gestures are identical, but the same in the way that certain physical inheritances are the same, recognizable across the variation, pointing to a common source. Steve Harvey stopped moving. He looked at Lorraine. He looked at Angela. He looked at Lorraine again. He said, to no one in particular, and everyone at once, hold on. The floor director looked up from his clipboard. Steve walked to the center of the stage, between the two podiums, equidistant between the two families. He said, I need to ask both of you something, and I need you to bear with me because I might be completely wrong about this. He looked at Lorraine. He said, you just did something. He touched his own collarbone, mirroring the gesture. You've been doing it all morning. When something moves you. Lorraine looked at him. She said, I do that. I've always done that. Steve looked at Angela. He said, you did it too. Just now. Angela looked at her own hand, which was still resting at her collarbone. She lowered it. She said, I didn't know I was doing it. Steve said, I know. He was quiet for a moment. The room was very quiet. Not the silence of a dramatic moment, the silence of something being considered very carefully by a man who has been on this stage for 25 years and has learned to trust the things he notices. He said to Lorraine, where are you from? Originally, where were you born? Lorraine said, Savannah, Georgia, born and raised. Steve said to Angela, your adoption record. You have one? Angela looked at him. Something moved through her face. She said, carefully, yes. Steve said, where does it say you were born? Angela said, Savannah, Georgia. The studio fell completely silent. Steve said, what month? Angela said, February. Steve looked at Lorraine. Lorraine's hand had come back to her collarbone. Steve said, February what? Angela said, the 14th. The studio fell completely silent for the second time. Lorraine Page looked across the stage at Angela Moss. She looked at her the way you look at something you have been imagining for 43 years and are not sure you are allowed to believe is real. She looked at her face, the cheekbones, the jaw, the specific quality of watchful stillness she had noticed in the woman across the stage all morning, without knowing why she had noticed it. She looked at Angela's hands. She looked at her own. She said, in a voice that was barely a voice, what year? Angela said, 1982. Lorraine Page sat down on the stage floor. Not from weakness, from the specific requirement of the moment. The way a body sometimes understands before the mind finishes processing that what has just happened needs to be received at a lower altitude, closer to the ground, in a position that does not require the legs to hold anything. She sat down and she covered her face with her hands, and she made a sound that was not a word. Angela Moss stood at her podium and looked at the woman sitting on the floor of the Family Feud stage and felt the specific vertigo of a person who has been searching for something for 25 years and has turned a corner and found it standing in an unexpected place and cannot make. The eyes and the understanding arrive at the same moment. She said, are you? She stopped. She said, did you? She stopped again. She said the only thing that was simple enough to say, was your baby's name Joy? Lorraine looked up. She said, yes. Angela Moss walked across the stage. She walked without being asked, without producing, without thinking, toward a woman she had never met, who was sitting on the floor of a television studio in Atlanta, and who had written a name on a piece of paper 43 years ago, in a room that smelled like floor cleaner, and had carried the paper ever since. She sat down on the floor next to Lorraine. Not across from her. Next to her. Close, Lorraine looked at Angela. Angela looked at Lorraine. Steve Harvey stood above them. He looked at their hands, both of them, resting on the floor of the stage, close together. He said 5 words in a voice that was not a television voice, that was not any kind of performance voice, that was simply the voice of a man naming what he saw. "You have the same hands." The studio fell completely silent for the 3rd time. In the contestant seats, Kezia Moss, 11 years old, had been watching her mother walk across the stage and sit down on the floor next to a woman she had never met. And she had watched them look at each other. And she had watched Steve Harvey say something she couldn't hear clearly. And she had looked at the 2 women and looked at her mother's hands and looked at the other woman's hands, and she said, to no one in particular, in the voice of a child who has seen what she has seen, "Mama, she moves like you." Nobody heard her over the silence. Nobody needed to. She had been right since the introductions, and she was right now, and she would remember, for the rest of her life, that she had noticed first. Steve Harvey pressed his handkerchief to his face. He walked a few paces. His shoulders moved. He stood with his back to the audience longer than he had ever stood that way. 8 seconds. 10. And when he turned back, his face had the expression of a man who has seen 25 years of extraordinary things and has just seen the most extraordinary thing of all and is not going to pretend otherwise. He said, "We need to confirm this properly. We're going to take a few minutes." He looked at his producer. "Get the application files. Both of them. Cross-reference the dates, the cities, the case numbers. I want confirmation before we go any further." He looked at Lorraine and Angela, still sitting together on the floor of the stage. "Don't move. Either of you. I'll be right back." Nobody moved. The studio held completely still for 6 minutes while the producer's team worked. 300 people sat in their seats and did not speak and did not look at their phones and did not do anything except watch 2 women sitting on a stage floor, their hands close together, not yet touching, waiting. The producer came back. He handed Steve Harvey a piece of paper. Steve read it. He looked at Lorraine. He looked at Angela. He nodded. He said, quietly, "It's confirmed." And Angela Moss took her mother's hand. The studio fell completely silent for the 4th time, the quietest silence of all. The silence that comes after the thing that has been coming for 43 years finally arrives, and the room does not have anything large enough to hold it, so it holds it in stillness. Then, Lorraine Page, 61 years old, said the only thing she had been waiting 43 years to say, Joy. Angela Moss, 43 years old, said, "I'm here." The studio rose. But Steve wasn't done. He stood above them and waited until they were ready to stand, and when they stood, he stood between them and he looked at the cameras and he said, "I have been hosting this show for 25 years. I have watched people win money and lose money and laugh and cry and surprise themselves and surprise each other. I have never." He stopped. He started again. "I know what it is to be lost. I have been lost in ways that felt permanent. I was sleeping in a 1976 Ford Tempo with nowhere to go and nothing coming, and I thought the world had finished with me. And someone I had never met stopped and saw me. Said something that reminded me I was still findable." He paused. "These 2 women have been findable to each other for 43 years. They have been lighting candles for each other for decades, without knowing the other was lighting one too. And they ended up on the same stage on a Tuesday in November because 2 families applied to a game show. And the universe, or God, or whatever you believe in, decided that this was the day." He looked at Lorraine and Angela. "This is the day." He called the director of an adoption reunion registry and family reunification nonprofit on stage, on the phone, in front of everyone. He said Lorraine Page's name. He said Angela Moss's name. He said Savannah, Georgia and Charleston, South Carolina, and February 14th, 1982, he said. These two women found each other today. I want to make sure that finding each other is not the end of the support they receive. It is the beginning. Whatever they need. Legal support for the reunion process, counseling, coordination, whatever the next 43 years require. He paused. And I want to establish a program for the people who are still lighting candles for someone they can't find, so that finding takes less time than 43 years, so that fewer people have to wait until a game show stage. He looked at Kezia in the contestant seats. He said, "You saw it before anyone." Kezia looked at him. She said, "She moves like my mama." I saw it during the introductions. Steve Harvey laughed, the real laugh, sudden and full. The audience laughed with him, and the laugh was wet at the edges and full at the center. The laugh of a room that has been holding something large for a long time and has found that it can hold laughter too. That laughter and the large thing are not incompatible. That joy, the word, the name, the thing, has room in it for both. The Page family had crossed the stage. Carol had her arms around Angela and was saying something into her hair. Desmond had shaken Darius's hand and then pulled him into an embrace. Jalen was standing next to Lorraine with the specific stillness of a man who is watching something he doesn't have words for and has decided the right response is simply to stay close. Darius Moss stood next to his wife and her mother. The phrase was new and would take time to become ordinary, and he intended to give it that time. And he looked at the two of them together and felt, very quietly, the particular gladness of watching someone you love receive something they have been waiting for, without knowing how long the wait would be. Kezia had come onto the stage. She stood next to Angela. She looked at Lorraine. She said, "Are you my grandma?" Lorraine looked at this 11-year-old child. She said, "If you'll have me." Kezia said, "Yes." She said it the way she said most things, completely, without qualification, with the open-handed certainty of a child who has decided and does not see the need for further deliberation. The studio fell completely silent for the fifth and final time. Today, Lorraine Page is 62 years old. She still works as a school librarian in Savannah. She lights a candle every February 14th. She no longer lights it alone. Last February, Angela drove from Charleston, and they sat together in Lorraine's living room with 2 candles and said the things that 43 years of separate silence had been saving up. Some of them, and the things that were not ready to be, said yet they set aside for next year. Because they have next year's now. They have as many as they are given, and they intend to use them. Angela Moss is 44 years old. She is still in Charleston. She is still Angela Moss, and she has not considered changing that. She was Moss before she found Page, and she will be both now. Which is not subtraction, which is addition, which is what reunion is. She opened the fireproof box and took out the adoption record and held it next to the birth certificate from Lorraine's wallet and looked at the reference numbers, which were the same, which had always been the same, which had been waiting 43 years for someone to hold them side by side. 3 months after the taping, the same Hands Foundation, named for Steve Harvey's 5 words, named for the physical inheritance that had given the moment its confirmation, named because sometimes the proof is in the body before it is in the paperwork, had funded reunion support services for 67 adult adoptees and birth parents across Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. The Foundation's primary program covered the costs of DNA testing, search specialist fees, legal counsel for reunion documentation, and therapeutic support for families navigating the first year of contact. The year that research consistently identified as the most complex, the most necessary, and the least supported. A year after the episode aired, the Same Hands Foundation had served 284 families and raised $11.8 million. It had partnered with 4 state adoption registries to offer voluntary opt and contact facilitation as a standard service. The foundation's intake coordinator said the most common thing people said when they called was, "I've been looking for a long time, and I don't know where else to try." She said the foundation's answer was always the same: "You found us. Let's start from here." Kezia Moss is 12 now. She has started calling Lorraine Grandma Lorraine, which took approximately 4 days to become natural, and has been natural ever since. She visits with Angela twice a year in Savannah, and stays in Lorraine's house in the guest room that used to be a study, and that Lorraine cleared without being asked, because she had 43 years of clearing to do, and she intended to do it. One evening on a visit, Kezia found Lorraine in the kitchen and said, "Can I see the paper?" "The one you kept?" Lorraine took the birth certificate from her wallet. She handed it to Kezia. Kezia looked at it for a long moment, at the faded ink and the white creases and the name Joy written in the space for the child's name. She looked at it with the methodical attention of a child who understands that she is holding something that has been held for a long time by someone who needed it. She said, "You carried this everywhere?" Lorraine said, "Everywhere." Kezia said, "For how long?" Lorraine said, "Since before your mama was born." Kezia looked at the paper. She looked at Lorraine. She said, "You can stop carrying it now." Lorraine looked at her granddaughter, this child she had not known existed 2 months ago. This child who had noticed what nobody else noticed during the introductions. This child who said things simply and completely and without ornament. She said, "I know." She took the birth certificate back. She folded it along its old creases, the white soft creases, the 43 years of folding, and she put it in her wallet. She kept it there. Not because she still needed to carry it, because it had been the thing that carried her toward this kitchen, toward this child, toward the morning when a man on a television stage had looked at 2 pairs of hands and named what he saw. She would keep carrying it. But now, she knew what it had been carrying her to. On February 14th, 2026, Angela and Kezia drove to Savannah from Charleston. Lorraine had 2 candles ready. They lit both of them. They sat together, 3 of them, grandmother and daughter and granddaughter, in the living room of the house on Bull Street, and they were quiet for a while. The way you are quiet with people you have stopped performing for. And then they were not quiet, because Kezia had questions about everything, and always had, and the questions made Lorraine laugh, and the laughing made Angela look at her. Mother with the expression she still had not finished learning to have, the expression of someone looking at a face they have always known and are meeting for the first time. The candles burned down. They left them burning longer than an hour this year. They had more time now. They intended to use it. If this story about Lorraine and Angela and 43 years of candles lit for each other in the dark moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to know that the person they have been looking for may be closer than they think, and that some things find their way home eventually on a Tuesday morning in November, in a way no one could have planned. Have you ever found someone you had given up finding? Or been found by someone who never stopped looking? Let us know in the comments. And ring that notification bell for more moments that remind us that love and time and the stubborn human need to find each other, none of it has an expiration date.